Hello, hello. We're going to talk today about my favorite topic, funneling and screening. But first, I want to thank everybody who subscribed to the channel. We hit a milestone as of last week. We are above 1,000 subscribers. I can't say, I don't know. I just don't know what to say. I would say I'm super happy, but mostly I just never thought it would get this many subscribers. So thank you all for subscribing to the channel and watching, and giving your support. I hope to keep going into as long as possible to make more content like this until somebody somebody better does it. Somebody better or somebody does it better than me, which hopefully will be soon because I don't particularly think I'm a well, I might have the mind for it. I'm not a very good content creator for sure. Anyway, I really appreciate the support of you guys listening to me talk and ramble on about things regarding Age of Sigmar. But today we're going to talk about funneling and screening. Most people probably know about screening, the concept or bubble wrapping, whatever you want to call it, and whatever term you want to use. Probably less people have heard of funneling. And that will be something I think people have figured, probably experience it once they're there, but like, how do you consistently replicate, make it happen? So I'm going to go into both those topics today, and it's apropos because the types of army I play are very much about maximizing these two mechanics or these two strategies on the table to your advantage. So the type of armies are usually have these things are armies which have lots of body count or lots of chaff units or some type of Envil unit backed by chaff unit. But in some cases, like I said in my other video, if you watch it breaking down the Corn army, I've took Warps on GT. This is especially good for armies which tend to be a little squishier or units which are a little glass cannony. You want to maximize the utility, the usage of this into your games. And you're going to I'm going to walk through what some of these positional things I've done in my games at the Warp Zone GT with my Corn Army over TTS, and I'll explain all of the concepts behind it. Additionally, I wanted to what's it called? I wanted to go over some core concept of to why you should do screening, why it's important, and but most importantly, why you should also funnel. Sorry, got a little sidetracked there, a little loss of mine. I am getting very thirsty, and it's been a long day. So for me, but anyway, you're not here to listen to me gripe. You're here to talk about screening and funneling. Okay, so I'll start with the loose definition for those who don't know what is screening. It's the concept of using usually what we call a chaff unit or a cheaper unit that you have, or it can be an expensive one as well. It's just something that blocks the ability for your opponent to engage the things that he wants to fight with because of a footprint or the number of models. Anyway, it's the concept. You can think of it like a speed bump. It's something that you're using to to slow down your opponent or completely block him. So there's two different types of screens. There is the complete movement blocker screens, which are think about you could say something like Archeon it could be a screen, right? Because he's such a huge base, you can position him between terrain pieces, and it's really hard for your opponent to just want to engage because he's Archeon, but also very hard to move past because of how you position him. So he's in that case, he's a true movement blocker. And then there's the screens which are more about not necessarily blocking your opponent's movement, but making sure that they engage when they do move there and they do engage your units. They can't get to the things you want to him. You avoiding him, preventing him from fighting into the things you don't want him to fight, but then also allowing you to fighting him with the things you want to fight. I know it's kind of confusing. For example, Cornless Fleshhounds are very good at basically setting up both movement blockers because of speed and board presence. They're pretty long. 5-man units make a pretty big board state, and they're also really good at bubble wrapping because, or screening in the other sense, because they can be positioned in a way where if your opponent gets into the blood letters, unless they have like the flesh hounds, unless they have 3-inch range, they can't fight in the blood letters. And most of the times, things that do have 3-inch range don't seem to, they're not super vast quantity of attack, so it's usually okay to get swung by, into blood letters. It means there's less swings in the flesh hounds. Anyway, the point of the story is that like you're either preventing them from moving forward, or you're preventing them from being able to fight into the things that you care about. Okay, that's fundamentally screening. Funneling is a more advanced way of screening. I will put it that way. Funneling is giving your opponent lanes of entry that are very dangerous, but also in the same sense, also limiting his ability to engage your units without actually purposely screening him. So I'll go right into some of that concept in a bit, but first I want to go over screening and the different types of screenings I used during the game at Warpzone GT. So let me hide this cover and bring on TTS. I know we're going to do this with technology. All right. So I set up two kind of screening example. This is the bloodletter bomb build. You probably see me playing at Warpzone GT. This is my what I call my weaker left flank. You see the Deathbringer here, the Blood Crushers, the Flesh Hounds, and so forth, and these Blood Crushers as well. So there's different utility into these types of screens and funneling tech. So firstly, what I should point at we'll do over this one here. What I should point at is the character placement. All right, so typically I will leave Skull Takers either right next to him or a little bit in the front. This board's positioned because there's the Bloodmaster here with the Strike First relic. And you'll notice in this corner pocket here, if your opponent basically decides to charge in this pocket here, you have to deal with the Strike First mechanic from the Bloodmaster. And there's also the other Bloodmaster here, not that he has Strike First, but it's just double redundancy unit character basically covering this flank, meaning like if he chooses to go through this lane of entry, it's more likely than not that he's going to fight first, that I'm going to get to fight first. Now, if he decides to charge in here, and I've set this up on purpose to explain why it's important to really pre-measure everything when you do this, and you think about like your movement very carefully. If he does charge in this direction here, you'll notice that he'll be outside of this one. He'll be outside of the 3-inch engagement from this guy, meaning I do not get the Strike First thing, and he gets to fight after piling it into the blood letters. So you have to make sure you close these types of doorways to prevent your opponent from doing that. And obviously that's, you could do it in multiple ways. You could basically by not having the Bloodmaster here, and then or leaving the leaving the Wrathmongers here. So in case he does engage and swings into, you're trying to limit the amount of combat attacks he can bring into the blood letters, right? Like if it's a big character, then that sucks, and not much you can do about it. It's very easy to avoid that Strike First thing when it's like a character model. But if it's a unit, it's very hard to bring in all the things you want into fighting into these blood letters. If you're basically stuck, you have to charge the Wrathmongers first. Okay? Anyway, so this is like kind of like an explanation and of not really funneling or screening, but like this is an important thing. You have to be spatially aware about the lanes of entry for your opponents, like charges if they decide to engage you. Now, talking about screening, so most of the time, we'll say this is a later half of the game. This is me setting up a funnel for my opponent. Most of the time when I'm screening the blood letters, these Flesh Hounds will be basically in a line in front, and exactly about 3 inches like away from your opponent. So if your opponent engages the Flesh Hound, they're forced to engage the blood letters. But in the games where like some things have double activations, like Vanguard and Chosen stuff, it's okay to basically put it a little bit further ahead. That way, in case he fights into him, kills them, like cool, do you want to double activate? And then and potentially be out of range because you put him so much farther away, or not getting enough attacks to be really useful for you into it. You have to really kind of like math it out before you make that decision. But like in some cases, I do put him in a way where if my opponent wants to use a double activation mechanic, it does, because I know like it's very unlikely that they'll kill all the bloodletters, but they'll kill a bunch of them or a few of them, and then I'll get to swing back into them. So like like you're trying to squeeze as much value as possible out of these units. So every turn you get engaged on your terms effectively is a win for you as well, for you as a player. Now, let's talk a little bit about following. Okay. This is in a real game example. This actually literally happened into my game against, I think, Noah. The Flesh Hounds here were imagined to be a terrain feature. So this terrain feature basically protected the left flank of these bloodletters. I'll put it into a little shape, a little closer to the shape that it was on the table. So I did not have to screen out the left-hand side of my bloodletters. I only had to screen out the rear and the right-hand side. And some of the dogs did make it to the right-hand side of this, but I'm not going to move in for an example. The example I'm trying to say is that, or trying to explain, is that Noah was in a state to be in a position to charge with his Warngrots, Skulltaker, or the Bloodletters. Now, in terms of position, Skulltaker was like a much easier charge than the Bloodletters. He was, basically 3 inches closer, I think, on that. Yeah, 3 inches, about 3 inches closer to my unit, and they were also like so he, to prevent me from redeploying, he purposely like left himself 9 inches basically away. He ended up making his charge, but because the charge was, he didn't really matter. He chose really this fulcrum point, Skulltaker, as the engagement point for his Boingrots. He had to end up like most of his Boingrots ended up being close after the charge, ended up being closer to Skulltaker than these Bloodletters. But he did have some of the Boingrots in or surrounding Skulltaker in an engagement of Bloodletters. Just the majority of them were over here basically because of the way the charge ended up being. In that game, and in the funneling technique didn't really work out because he ended up killing Skulltaker on the charge, which was very unlikely since 15 Boingrots only do about 7 out of mortal wounds, and he has a 4-up ward, 7 wounds, so he had taken 0 damage. So he should have statistically lived, but he didn't. So sucks to suck, I guess. But there was still this guy here. So that one Boingrot here would have basically allowed me to engage, swing all the Bloodletters in. Now, no one knew that, so he purposely kept out of this range. But once again, all these models are not really that close to Bloodletters. So when he did get to activate his first activation, he didn't get that many swings in. He only killed like 4 or 5 Bloodletters. The Bloodletters on the return swing, though, because they got to do that, their pilot in 2-inch reach attacks, picked up, I think, almost all, if not all, the Boingrots effectively because he had failed his 5-up ward. But had Skulltaker lived, all of those Boingrots here couldn't even pile in towards the Bloodletters. It would have even been less attacks. They could pile in towards him, but they would have to make sure they end closer to this guy because he was the closest starting model. This really was like, this guy was a super impediment. Not only was he like, it gives you the perspective of your opponent having the ability to think like, oh, this is a closer charge point. But if you don't, most armies don't have a mortal wounds on the charge. If you do that with a unit, you're gonna find yourself like really hard to pile in into getting maximum value into Bloodletters, and that's a win for the Corn player. He gets to basically potentially get a blood type off Skulltaker from dying. Cool. And he gets to fight almost at full efficiency all of his Bloodletters back into you. In worst case scenario, for the next round of combat, you're most likely, like, you're going to have to keep finding ways to get out 3 inches of this guy, because if not, you'll make them swing first into whatever's left. So in terms of sequencing and charge, like funneling is a lot harder to pull off, but it also has a much higher upside, right? Because you're going to get value out of basically all of your JCs potentially, and the unit you're fighting with. Now, I should point out like this technique is not always right. It loses a lot of value if you're fighting like low model count, super elite units, like giants or like small 3-man units of Vanguard and so forth and so forth. Like it doesn't get a lot of value from that. But when you're fighting like big chunky blocks of infantry, you can get a lot of value out of it. So it's not useful everywhere. You should always do it. But when if you recognize that there's an opportunity for funneling, I think you'll get a lot more value out of it than the traditional screening approach, which is basically setting up the flesh hounds in the front, maybe in 3 inches, and that way so you get to activate a paladin. But the thing is that like most of the time you're gonna get to paladin and like the funneling approach lets me swing more swings into you, versus the traditional screening approach lets you prevent you can position yourself in a way where I don't maybe only get the front rank of bloodletters swinging and then get less attacks. Also, the other issue of the traditional sense of screening is if you do this, and this is really only applicable to my corner list. You have a strike first guy, right? I have a strike first guy. You're like, cool, these flesh hounds are so close that even if I let you get into your strike first mechanic, you can't pilot and swing anywhere with the bloodletters. So like there is like in that case like you're better off like basically just making sure your bloodletters are going to be fundamentally like when he activates, you don't want to be in a position to activate him activate him first in that case, right? You want to be in a position to activate him second or third or late in the turn sequence. So it's not I hope this makes sense. Like I'm trying to really transcribe some basically tribal knowledge I've developed over time from playing the game into this medium, and I recognize as I'm doing through this might not make sense to a lot of people, and it's really hard to gauge. Like screening is always good. If you can't do funneling, always do screening. Like screening is always good. There's no real downside to screening, other than like you're not getting as much value potentially because you're not activating that unit of bloodletters as they kill your flesh hounds. But that's okay because it means like your bloodletters are not getting attacked in. There's also a place where screening you should not do screening. I should mention, and that's when you recognize your opponent's ability to hit the bloodletter block isn't good enough to kill them, right? like if you give him only one option, it's to charge bloodletters, and then all of those options are like even in this case, like let's say like, and this is only true for really this corn list, but if you have this like strike first guy over here, or like even like a super melee character that your opponent wants to avoid fighting, his only avenue of charging is maybe on this corner here, and like he's trying to he's going to be very limited to how many swings he can get, but depending on the unit. And like once again, if you recognize that you can't kill all the bloodletters, then great, like fantastic, do it. I think this type of like list this type of unit only really works in these kind of like combo pieces into it, because just 20 bloodletters by themselves for just 5 Wrathmongers is very hard to it's very hard to protect, because you're not really threatening your opponent with anything else. Like if he just dedicates all his swings in his bloodletters, the only thing he has to worry about is Wrathmongers. But if there is like Bloodmasters or Skulltaker around, there's additional threat vectors that he has to deal with. Obviously, this is within the concept of this, just like this combo here. But like, it's why like having these like I really enjoy lists with like these kind of support melee heroes into them, because it makes these infantry blocks a little bit more, I wouldn't say resilient, but more challenging for your opponents to just necessarily just kind of like get a big win into. Because the last thing you want is like in a situation where they swing into your bloodletters and they just pick up the block. You still want to be able to lock them in combat with like one of the character, right? So that way, when whoever wins prio, or whatever in the next turn, you either prevent redeploy or heroic willpower or heroic recovery for them. And if you get in the double turn situation, if you win the priority, maybe because your hero's in combat with them, you're like, cool, I don't necessarily need to care about taking the top of the turn because that unit, whatever killed my bloodletter, is stuck fighting this one hero anyway, so it delays them for one more turn. So lots of value into that. This is another type of screening I did in the game, multiple games currently. This is my weaker flank positional state. What basically this guy and these three blood crushers. The point is to just basically take an objective that where basically these bloodletters are not into or trying to fight, and then using these flesh hounds as like delaying basically delaying as much as possible. Well, in this case, I want flesh hounds to these bloodletters to be able to activate if you charge my flesh hound, so keeping the the flesh hounds less than like 2.5 inches from the bloodletters or within that range, the engagement range. In case of this setup, I don't want the blood crushers to be engaged at all. So you're gonna have to be more than 3 inches basically, so they can't like pile into them, because the blood crushers do most of their damage. A lot of their damage output comes from their charge mechanic, and you don't want them locked in combat either, for a couple reasons. A, murder lust. B, better attack profile. So let's say your opponent basically charges in, kills the flesh hounds, and he sits just basically outside your combat of you, and you are there's a new turn order, and you're like, cool. Same thing that happened over here, right? I was describing about them being dead and having a hero being alive blocking them in combat. You're gonna do the same thing with Murderlust and Corn. This is basically by having Murderlust, you can move a blood crushers 1 inch, re-engage them in combat, and then all of a sudden, or if you roll even higher, you can even make it more of a nightmare by basically corner hitting them with it, so they can't necessarily pile in their unit effectively into the blood crushers. But if you do go top of the next turn, or whatever happens, or your next turn, you could just charge in and do your damage, get the full value. Now, in the case of the flesh hounds die, and you don't get any situation here where you don't get to activate this at all, and your opponent just re-engages. Well, the good news is that whatever he does to this 3-man blood crusher unit, he also has to deal with the Deathbringer. So, not that the Deathbringer is going to do damage, but same recurrent setup here. Hey, I'm screening this guy because he's a JC and he sits on an objective. B, because if you decide to kill the blood crushers and you can't kill the Deathbringer, then you're stuck in combat. So same thing. And then you'll notice that also in case these blood crushers die and the Deathbringer dies, who knows? Next turn, Murderlust the other blood crushers, keep them locked. Like this entire positional screen and funneling thing here is all about basically. I know I'm probably not going to kill win this battle here of these resources. These is minimal resource investment here. I'm talking 600 points worth of army, but because of these layering and how the synergies of the army works, it lets me basically have the ability to really slow down my opponent's pressure points here, whatever investment of points they made over here, while I'm hoping this basically does the rest of the work. I hope I was able to convey why you should screen and why you should funnel. But before I go, I wanted to explain another. Explain another thing that happened in one of my games about screening. So we talked about screening by units and engagement and so forth. But have you ever considered screening with terrain and invocations? So I'll go get it. I'll show you what I mean. Sorry, we're doing it live now. All right, let's see. Chaos. Yes. It's a more search icon. So a lot of people usually use endless spells and invocations in their true, based on what their war scrolls say, like, hey, move forward, kill things, or move forward, debuff things, or so forth and so forth. But the beautiful thing about these models is that they're usually also tend to be super big model-wise, and you can use them to completely block movement. In one of my games against Mike Vagnos at Warp Zone GT, I don't have the terrain feature to replicate this, but basically I had 2 very large L-shaped terrain feature down the center, And by placing a RAFAX in this manner and the icon in this manner, with leaving a little bit less than an inch in gap between both of them, I was able to create, and 1 inch away from the terrain, I was able to create this basically what it looks like an 11-inch like no man's basically wall. And if you position the flesh hounds in a way where he can't end a movement past the icons, and he can't necessarily fit his bases to swing into you. If he does decide to make the mistake of getting too close or and potentially charge the flesh hounds, and or when in our game, what happened is Magor means flesh hound. We call it flesh hound. This little bugger over here was the last piece over here that basically kind of blocked the way. And so when he charged into it and killed it, the unit of flesh hound here was like locked in combat with him. And because of this very tight and narrow space, he was never able to really bring a lot of attacks into him, and he was locked with these flesh hounds and couldn't move over this like screen basically. And then the next following turn, the RAFAX, when it was my turn to basically bring my guns to bear, or whatever you want to call it, into it, the RAFAX basically moved out of the way, bleeding icon moved out of the way, you know, or in a way, or moved in a way where it lowered the apparent ability of my opponent. Like, you need to use endless spells and invocations as movement deterring more than just what it says on their war scroll. You can use them as screens. You can use them to block pylons. They're very incredibly good at that. You don't necessarily always have to get the value from the war scroll. Sometimes, in most cases, just using him as a move blocker and a pylon denier is amazing, and will get you a lot more value. Okay, I think I covered a lot. I don't know. I've spoke a lot today, and because there's 2 videos coming out, and I hope this was educational and enlightening. I don't know if my complex thought came through, and if they did not, please ask questions in the comment section, and just to so I can clarify and I can explain things. And hopefully this was useful for everybody. Have a lovely rest of your weekend, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.